That morning, a gentle golden sunlight spread over every corner of Woodridge Elementary School, making the place feel more peaceful and picturesque than ever. The cheerful chatter of children mixed with the bustling preparations for the school's big event, Safety Day. A special day was held with the hope of equipping the kids with essential safety knowledge. From afar, a police car slowly rolled into the schoolyard, catching the attention of the children playing nearby. Officer David Carter stepped out, solid build, a warm, approachable smile. But what thrilled the children most wasn't him. It was his special companion, Buddy, a retired K9 dog who once served in the police force. Buddy was a German shepherd with a strong physique, a sleek black and tan coat, and deep eyes that shone with intelligence and absolute loyalty. Every calm, deliberate step he took brought an odd sense of reassurance to everyone around. The children eagerly gathered around him, excited to pet the beloved dog, their eyes filled with admiration. "Welcome, Officer Carter and Buddy. We're so glad to have you here today." Principal Mary Thompson's warm voice rang out enthusiastically as she waved them in. David gently bent down to stroke Buddy. "Good boy, my friend. Today we're going to show the kids just how brave you are." Buddy seemed to understand. His eyes softened, and his tail wagged lightly with trust. The event unfolded in a joyful atmosphere. The children were captivated by the stories of bravery and thrilling rescues performed by Buddy. David's heartfelt, sincere storytelling drew everyone into a world of man and dog, of trust and understanding, something humans rarely find. But just as the excitement peaked, Buddy suddenly froze. His entire body tensed, ears standing alert as if he'd sensed something disturbing. Without warning, Buddy let out a sharp, piercing bark, loud and fierce, shattering the serenity of the schoolyard. David looked down in surprise, trying to calm his dog. "Buddy, what's wrong, Buddy?" But Buddy didn't respond as usual. His eyes, cold and alert, were fixed on someone, Ms. Sarah Miller, the new teacher. Everyone adored her for her kind demeanor and ever-present smile. Sarah looked puzzled, her smile slowly fading as the most famous K9 in the county stared at her with unsettling suspicion. "Maybe he's just confused," she said, trying to stay calm, though her eyes betrayed unease. Buddy wouldn't stop. His barking echoed through the schoolyard as if he were desperately trying to communicate a warning only he could sense. David felt a chill. He knew Buddy too well. A dog of such training and instinct would never react like this without reason. Something serious, something hidden behind Sarah Miller's friendly smile, was triggering Buddy's extraordinary sense, and only Buddy could see it. Buddy's first bark cut through the calm like a bolt of lightning, jolting everyone out of the moment. As he continued barking, loud and insistent, a wave of confusion rippled through the crowd of teachers and students. No one understood what was happening. All they knew was that this decorated dog, known for his loyalty and instinct, was reacting with a kind of intensity never seen before. Officer David Carter, Buddy's longtime partner, paused. He crouched and gently placed a hand on Buddy's firm back, his usual way of soothing the dog in stressful moments. But Buddy wouldn't calm. The fur along his neck bristled, ears taut, his body coiled like a spring, ready to act. "Buddy," David called softly, his voice low, laced with caution. But the dog's eyes never wavered. They stayed locked on Sarah Miller, the new second-grade teacher standing just a few steps away. A woman described as warm, devoted, and loving with children was now the focus of a deadly serious gaze. Sarah kept a gentle smile on her face, but her eyes were no longer calm. "Maybe he's reacting to my scent," she said softly, hand over her chest in mock surprise. "I did use a new lotion this morning. Maybe it's too strong." David gave a slight nod but said nothing. He was used to discerning between innocent excuses and subtle deflections. This time he looked only at Buddy, because that dog's eyes had never lied to him. Those were the eyes of instinct, of protection, eyes that once helped save a kidnapped girl in another state. and that had detected explosives from the faintest residue. Buddy kept barking, not the playful kind, but a deep, sharp warning. His body lowered into a ready stance, tail stiff, weight shifted forward. David knew what that meant. "Does the dog usually act like this?" another teacher whispered. "No," David replied simply. "Only when he senses a clear threat." Some children began to squeeze each other's hands and step back toward their teachers. One boy covered his ears, frightened. A little girl with honey-blonde curls, Lucy Parker, peeked out from behind her teacher, eyes fixed on Buddy as if she, too, could feel something wasn't right. Sarah maintained her calm exterior, but the corners of her mouth tightened. She stepped back toward the whiteboard, her right hand clenching the hem of her blouse. "Maybe it's the sandwich I brought at a barbecue. Dogs have sharp noses, right?" She smiled again, but her voice had lost its natural ease. David said nothing. He watched the way she moved, how her eyes darted around seeking affirmation from those around her. But those eyes, those people, they were shifting, no longer filled with trust. Now there was suspicion, wondering, a silent question. Why is Buddy acting this way with her? Buddy's barking continued, now laced with a low growl rumbling from his throat, a sound David knew all too well. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was preparation to act. David gripped the leash tightly, his voice low but firm. "Buddy, stand down." The dog halted, not retreating, but not advancing either. His sharp eyes never left Sarah. The scene, on one side, a woman with kind eyes now tinged with fear, on the other, a loyal dog growling protectively, cast an eerie silence over what had been a joyful schoolyard. Inside David, a troubling thought began to form. Buddy had never been wrong. David had seen him sniff out a bomb in what looked like a harmless handbag at a crowded train station. Buddy had tracked down a fugitive with a heavy criminal record, guided only by a faint scent left on a forgotten glove. And now Buddy was using that same instinct to point, unmistakably, at Sarah Miller, the beloved teacher. David didn't yet know the truth, but he knew one thing. Buddy saw what people often chose to ignore, and this time, David wasn't going to dismiss it. Not again. Not if even one child was in danger, and no one else could see it yet. The schoolyard had gradually quieted after Buddy's first bark, but everyone could feel it. Something was simmering in the air, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The laughter and chatter had been replaced with caution and watchful eyes, tracking every move of the retired K-9 who still bore the aura of a true warrior. Officer David Carter gently tightened the leash, sensing the tension in Buddy's muscles. This wasn't just alertness. It was a full defensive posture, even readiness to strike if necessary. His ears were upright, tail twitching rhythmically, nose extended forward, eyes fixed unwaveringly on one person, Ms. Sarah Miller. Sarah stood just a short distance away, gripping her bag tightly, trying to maintain a soft smile. "I don't understand why the dog is reacting like this," she said, trying to sound calm. "Maybe it's because I have a cat at home? Dogs often react to cat smells, don't they?" She gave a slight laugh. But to David, that laugh was no longer sincere. It lingered a bit too long. And her eyes, despite trying to look directly, held something unnatural, like a performance masking something else. David stepped forward, voice calm but clear. "Miss Sarah, I need to ask again. Are you carrying any food? Meat? Lunch? Strong deodorant? Or anything unusual in scent?" She hesitated for a beat, then shook her head. "Just a granola bar. Nothing else." She gestured to her bag, her tone still gentle, but her breathing was noticeably faster. Immediately, Buddy barked again, louder, fiercer, followed by a long, deep growl from his throat. The sound sliced through the tense atmosphere. There was no doubt now. This was a warning. David froze for a brief second, just long enough to realize this wasn't agitation. This was serious. The kind of response Buddy had shown around explosives, or child predators. Buddy didn't make mistakes. Not ever. Around them, teachers and parents began whispering, Some younger students clutched their backpacks, others hid behind their teachers. Buddy's bark didn't just startle, it triggered something primal, a survival instinct adults usually lull with false senses of security. Inside a nearby classroom, through a slightly opened window, Lucy Parker's eyes flickered. The little girl remained seated, clutching her backpack like armor. No one noticed, but Lucy had been watching Buddy from the moment he entered the schoolyard. Her gaze moved slowly between the growling dog and Ms. Sarah, the teacher she had once adored. But today something felt different. It wasn't Buddy who was wrong. It was Lucy who hadn't dared to look closely before. She had felt something was off for a long time, but fear, and the desire to be good, had made her convince herself, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. Buddy barked again, this time not into the air. His nose dipped to the ground and moved deliberately toward the edge of the classroom, toward where Lucy sat near the door. He stopped, sniffed deeply, then let out a short, sharp bark, not in fear, not in threat, but as if marking something. David turned. Buddy had shifted focus, not on Sarah anymore, but on Lucy? No, not Lucy. Her backpack. He stepped quickly towards the girl. Lucy? He crouched, voice soft as a breath. Can I see your backpack? It's okay, I just want to make sure there's nothing in there that's confusing, Buddy. Lucy opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. Her lips trembled. For a few seconds, her entire body seemed to shrink under the weight of a silent battle. Finally, she gave a small nod and shakily handed her backpack to David. He opened it slowly. Books, a pencil case, a unicorn drawing, an unopened bag of snacks. But deep in a hidden compartment, his fingers brushed something cold and sharp. A syringe needle. Next to it, a small piece of fabric. Thin, faintly sweet and artificial in scent. David's face tightened. A smell he'd never forget. Chloroform. Lucy burst into tears. I didn't know what it was, she sobbed. Miss Sarah said if I didn't keep it safe, something bad would happen to my mom. Her tiny sobs hit David like thunder. Buddy stood silent now, no longer barking or growling. His eyes were calm, as if he had just completed a part of his duty, uncovering what no one dared believe. David stood, eyes turning to Sarah Miller. But the teacher had backed toward the whiteboard. Her face was pale, hands still clasped but visibly trembling. Everyone was staring now, and for the first time, those eyes, teacher and student alike, held doubt. Buddy stepped slowly to position himself between her and the classroom exit, his stare a clear warning. This ends here. No one leaves until the truth comes out. In a world where adults too often trust appearances, sometimes only a dog who listens to his instincts is the last hope to protect what's most fragile. David stood there, still holding Lucy's small backpack, his chest heavy with a weight that felt like stone. In front of him was Sarah Miller, face drained of color, eyes stripped of their usual composure. Beside him, Buddy kept quiet watch, no longer barking or growling, but standing firm between the woman and the classroom door. His posture said everything. At that moment, as the truth began to pierce the sweet veneer, memories returned to David like a creeping fog, slow, silent, and sharp as blades. 3 years earlier, a small town on the outskirts of Arizona. A summer morning like any other. Buddy was still in his prime, young, agile, and the star of the K-9 unit. David, too, had fewer silver strands in his hair. Together they were unstoppable, solving over 20 cases in 18 months, from drug busts to fugitive captures. But then came a case they didn't win, one David never forgave himself for, one Buddy never forgot. The girl's name was Emily Reyes, 7 years old. Disappeared while playing in front of her grandparents' house. No witnesses, no security cameras, just a trail of unfamiliar shoe prints leading into the woods west of town. David and Buddy were called in that very day. David remembered every detail. Buddy tracking scent with his nose nearly to the ground, eyes locked in tense focus. They spent the day combing woods and streams, chasing wisps of scent on the wind, following a thread across the abyss. But they arrived too late. Just 1 hour too late. Buddy had found Emily's handkerchief, buried under rotting leaves, stained with dried blood. Not far from there, deep in a damp crevice of rock, lay her body, curled under a child's coat, eyes closed as if still sleeping. David carried her out in his arms, numb. And Buddy, who had never failed, didn't bark. He lowered his head, whimpered, and sat trembling beside her body. From that day on, Buddy changed. He still obeyed, still worked, still protected, but something behind his eyes was different. Around children he grew more sensitive, more alert. He was no longer just a police dog following commands. He was a living creature carrying memory, regret, unnamed sorrow. David had him checked many times after that, thinking perhaps the stress had broken something in him. But vets all said he was healthy. Just remembering. And David remembered too. But Emily Reyes's case wasn't the deepest scar. Years earlier, David had lost his youngest sister, Rachel Carter, 11 years old, to a kidnapper who was never caught. She vanished walking home from the library. Never found. The family never recovered. His father died of a stroke not long after. His mother sank into years of depression. David became a cop because of Rachel. He had often wondered, if I had Buddy back then, would Rachel still be alive? No one could answer. But David made a vow. Never again would a child disappear unnoticed. And Buddy, though not a cop in human terms, had made the same vow with his soul. That's why, today, when Buddy reacted so violently to Sarah Miller, David didn't doubt. He didn't need a file. He didn't need proof. All he had to do was look into his dog's eyes and listen with his heart to know that this couldn't happen again. They both lived with scars from the past, but those scars had forged a man who wouldn't accept silence when children were at risk, and a dog who never forgot the scent of evil. Memories may fade, but the feeling of failing to protect a child never does. It carves into the bone and erodes the heart, and there is only one way to heal it. Never let it happen again. David gave Buddy's leash a gentle squeeze, bent down, and whispered, "This time, we weren't too late, old friend." Buddy didn't look up, but he crouched lower, ears alert, eyes narrowing, and in a language beyond words he replied, "No, this time we were right on time." David was still crouched beside Buddy, eyes quietly fixed on the four-legged friend who had walked with him through the darkest days. That gaze had never lied to him, and this time was no exception. As the memories of Emily Reyes and Rachel Carter had yet to settle, a sudden shift in Buddy's posture tightened David's chest. Buddy turned abruptly, lunged forward, straining at the leash, heading straight for Lucy Parker, the little girl with wide brown eyes and a small frame who was clutching her backpack like it held a secret. The dog stopped in front of her seat, not barking. He lowered his nose, sniffed deeply around the bag, and then stood still. Ears straight, body rigid. A low growl rumbled from his throat, the kind David had learned never to ignore. "Lucy," David said gently, his voice soft like he was speaking to his own daughter. "Sweetheart, I need to look inside your backpack, just to make sure everything's safe." Lucy looked up, lips quivering. Her small hands tightened around the bag's straps, then loosened, then tightened again. In her eyes, something cracked. A boundary between keeping silent and speaking up began to collapse, revealing a fear too deep to name. Slowly, she pushed the backpack forward, her hands trembling so much that the strap thudded against the desk. David received it with both hands as if taking something sacred. He unzipped it slowly, eyes never leaving Buddy, who was still watching, muscles taut, as though bracing for something. Inside were ordinary things: school books, a pink pencil case, a sketchbook with a unicorn on the cover, and an unopened snack pack. But David knew the scent Buddy had picked up wasn't coming from these. He unzipped a side compartment, sliding his hand between the lining and the cushioned base. That's when his fingers touched something cold, sharp, metallic. David clenched his hand and pulled from the hidden pocket a small, used syringe. The needle was gone, but the barrel and cap were intact. Next to it is a thin piece of folded cloth. As he unfolded it, a sickly, sweet, artificial smell rose, so overpowering it made his stomach churn. He knew this smell. Chloroform. David's whole body stiffened. He turned to Lucy. Her face was now pale as paper. Her lips were pressed tight, small hands clasped so hard that her nails left red marks on her skin. Her eyes held no more tears, only a fear that had finally been unburdened. He knelt, gently placing the backpack on the ground. His voice dropped, tender, meant for her alone. "Lucy, who gave you these?" She looked at him, and after a brief moment of frozen silence, tears began to stream down her cheeks. Her small shoulders shook. "Miss Sarah," she whispered. "She said if I didn't keep it safe, if I dropped it or told anyone, my mom would get hurt." Each word came out between sobs, jagged and gasping. But they were clear-cutting through the air like knives into the hearts of every adult in the room. No one dared breathe. No one could look at each other. Miss Sarah Miller, praised by the school just last week for helping a student improve her grades, known to all for her gentle smile, was now standing near the whiteboard, slowly backing away, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. Buddy growled, not to threaten, but to warn. David shot to his feet, his voice sharp as steel. "No one leaves this room," he said loudly, with a calm authority that left no room for argument. Sarah raised her hands, palms out, trying to appear composed. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. I don't know why the child said that. I didn't even know she had those things." But David wasn't listening anymore. He picked up the cloth and syringe, and then looked toward the door. "Principal, call the county sheriff and school security. Immediately. I have evidence of attempted sedation or abduction of a child, and I have a witness." The room fell silent. Only Buddy remained between Sarah and the door, not barking, not growling, just standing, eyes locked on the woman who minutes ago had been the beloved teacher. Lucy sat quietly now, arms no longer clutching the bag that had weighed on her so heavily. For the first time, her breathing was steady. Her hands relaxed. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she felt believed. And it had been Buddy, the one who listened with instinct deeper than words, who heard her truth first. The classroom air grew dense, as if every molecule were listening. Silence fell after David ordered the school to call the police and district security. All eyes now turned to Sarah Miller, the woman who had, just minutes ago, been a symbol of kindness and care, slowly retreating toward the whiteboard, scanning the room for escape. But there was no escape. Standing solid as a statue before the door was Buddy, the German shepherd, whose eyes now carried not just alertness, but a cold understanding. He didn't need to bark, didn't need to growl. His presence alone said it all. "No one gets past me with danger in their heart." Sarah forced a smile. "I think everyone is misinterpreting things. I have no reason to harm a child." "No," David said, his voice like forged steel. "You had a reason. You had a plan. What you didn't account for was Buddy." Buddy stepped forward slowly, one pace closer to Sarah. He didn't bark, just stared. That stare wasn't angry. It was knowing. The gaze of a creature who had seen darkness, who recognized evil's shape, and said with his eyes, "I know what you are." "You won't fool me," Sarah faltered, her hands clenched, fingers twitching at the edge of her blouse as if grasping for some final piece of control. She glanced toward the window, calculating. Just a step back from Buddy. Just a moment of David's inattention. Then she lunged towards the door, sweeping a student chair with her arm to create a diversion with a loud crash. But Buddy didn't hesitate. The moment Sarah moved, he launched forward like lightning, cutting her off and blocking the exit. A growl thundered from deep in his chest, his front legs planted like anchors, forcing her to stumble, nearly falling. David was already there. In one swift move, he locked her arms behind her back. His voice rang out, calm and cold. "Sarah Miller, you are being detained for an investigation into the endangerment of a minor and possession of tools suspected to be used for child sedation or abduction. You have the right to remain silent." Sarah didn't resist. She stood still, shoulders sagging like a mask, peeling away. David looked at her face, really looked for the first time. And when the light fell across her jaw, he saw it. A thin scar beneath her left ear, once hidden by her hair. He had seen it before. In a case file no one ever forgot. She wasn't Sarah Miller, she was Natalie Graves. A name that had once appeared on a federal watch list 3 years ago. Suspected of involvement in a tri-state child trafficking ring. Never caught. No fingerprints match. Changed identity. Faked credentials. She vanished every time law enforcement got close. Until today, David tightened the cuffs around her wrists. Natalie Graves. That's your real name, isn't it? Sarah, or rather Natalie, said nothing. Her face turned ghostly. The smile was gone. No more excuses. No more performance. Only the naked truth of someone who'd been unmasked. Behind them, the students remained frozen. But one little girl had sat down again, breathing easier, hands no longer clutching her backpack like a burden. Lucy Parker said nothing, but her eyes, no longer afraid, glowed with quiet gratitude. The principal and 2 teachers entered with a security officer. David nodded. "Take her out, gently. No need for the kids to see any more than they already have." Buddy stayed in place. As Natalie was led past him, she lowered her head, avoiding his gaze. An instinctive act of submission. No words were spoken, but everyone knew the one who saw through her from the start was the dog. As the classroom returned to silence, David knelt beside Buddy. He didn't say a word, just placed a hand gently on the dog's head. Buddy tilted his head slightly toward him, ears relaxed, as if understanding something deeper than orders. Relief. "This time we were on time," David whispered. Buddy said nothing, but his calm, unwavering gaze was answered enough. In a world where people are too easily fooled by appearances, it had been Buddy who saw the truth from the very first moment. As the figure of Natalie Graves disappeared behind the classroom door, escorted by local security, David Carter remained in the now eerily quiet room. He didn't speak, didn't rush to leave. He simply looked at Buddy, his loyal companion, now sitting beside Lucy Parker's purple backpack, eyes softened as if releasing a long-held breath after hours of relentless vigilance. David walked over and sat beside Buddy, gently resting a hand on his back. No words were needed, just a quiet bond between 2 souls who had walked through the darkest parts of life together. He murmured, more to himself than anyone, "Thank you, Buddy, but I've got a feeling this isn't over." He was right. That afternoon, once the custody procedures for Natalie Graves were completed, David pulled out his phone and called a number he only used when things weren't normal. "I need you," he said simply as the call connected. The voice on the other end replied, calm but razor sharp. "You wouldn't call unless it was serious. Send me the address." The man who walked into the Woodridge County Police headquarters later that day was Ben Hunter, a digital forensics investigator, data analyst, and cyber tracking expert with a reputation in law enforcement circles. Unlike the hardened, grizzled look of most who dealt with crime daily, Ben had the appearance of someone who lived more in code than under the sun. Black-rimmed glasses, a laptop backpack, a lightweight jacket, simple in style, but behind the understated image was a razor-sharp mind once recruited by the FBI for federal-level cases. David greeted him with a nod. Buddy approached, gave a single sniff, then sat back down as if to say, "He's good." "It's been a while," Ben said, glancing at Buddy with recognition. "He still remembers me?" "You're one of the few he doesn't have to smell 3 times, David replied. "And if he still trusts you, so do I." Ben sat down at the table and opened his laptop. "Tell me everything." David laid it out with precision. An impersonating teacher, sedative tools, Lucy's fragile confession, Buddy's unwavering response, and the name that resurfaced from a federal watch list: Natalie Graves. Ben tapped out a few quick commands. The glow from the screen cast sharp shadows across his face. In under 5 minutes, his system had pulled up the old profile. Natalie Graves, formerly registered under 3 different aliases in 3 states, working as a teaching assistant, after-school care worker, and, most recently, a full-time teacher at Woodridge Elementary. "I don't think this was an isolated case," Ben said, his eyes slowly turning to David. "She wasn't working alone." "You're talking about a network?" David asked, though the answer already echoed inside him. Ben nodded. "I started with her confiscated phone. It's a burner, but she didn't wipe it properly. There's a string of encrypted messages sent to a number labeled Sparrow Gray. The same IP address pops up in Nevada, Oregon, and New Mexico." David exhaled. The cold crept in. "They weren't just targeting Lucy," Ben continued. "Records show Natalie interacted with at least 8 children in various jobs. Most of them were kids of single mothers. That's the pattern." David fell silent. In his mind, faces flickered. Lucy, Emma, Maya, and who knew how many others, never realizing how close they'd come to danger. Buddy stood and walked to the window, gazing out over the schoolyard. A few children played with a ball, laughter carried on the wind. But Buddy didn't move. He stood like a sentinel, as if he knew the threat hadn't truly passed. David followed his gaze. After a long pause, he said, voice low, "If Natalie was just a finger, then we've only cut off a hand. The rest of the arm is still hiding somewhere." Ben turned back to his screen. "I'll find the rest." David nodded. "I'll go with Buddy. You dig through the data. We'll follow the scent, the eyes, the instincts. We'll drag them all into the light before another child disappears." Outside, the sky began to cloud over, but inside that small room, something was becoming clear. This wasn't just about a school anymore. It was a hunt between light and shadow, and leading the charge was a dog who never forgot the scent of failure. Outside a small house on the edge of town, the soft glow of a street lamp cast golden light across the damp pavement, illuminating the slender silhouette of a woman leaning against the doorway. Inside, her daughter had just fallen asleep after an evening of tears, but the mother stayed awake, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the backyard fence. Emily Parker was not the kind of woman who broke easily, but tonight the fear of a mother had carved itself deep into her features, and in her quiet gaze lived a wound without a name. David Carter pulled up out front. Buddy sat alert in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the yard like a soldier guarding sacred ground. When David stepped out, Emily already had the door open, as if she'd known he would come, as if she'd been waiting for the one person she could still trust. "She's asleep," Emily whispered. Just before she closed her eyes, she asked, "Will Officer Buddy stay close to our house, Mom?" David smiled. "That question deserves a promise." Buddy entered the house without a word. He circled the space, inspecting every corner. Kitchen, under the stairs, behind the shoe rack, moving like he was searching for something people couldn't see. Emily watched his steps closely, her expression softening, as if something in the house had been quietly cleansed by his presence alone. "I found this," Emily said, pulling a small Ziploc bag from her coat pocket and placing it on the table. Inside was a crumpled note, rain-damp and carefully preserved. David opened it to reveal a scrawled message in black ink. "Watch the back door. Don't expose." "It was stuck under the mat by the back door," she explained. "I don't know how long it's been there, but it doesn't feel like a reminder. It feels like a warning." David studied the paper. The handwriting was hurried, but not sloppy, like someone panicked, yet trying to keep control. "Notice anything else unusual around the house?" he asked, voice low. Emily wrapped her hands around a cooling mug. "Yes. Last night I heard footsteps. Light but steady. I thought maybe a cat. But what scared me most was the neighbors' dogs. They always bark when someone walks by. But last night silence, like something made them stay quiet." David tensed. He turned to Buddy. The dog was now standing at the back door, head lowered, nose to the floor. David didn't need words to know. Buddy had found something. "There's a trace," he muttered, stepping forward. Buddy scratched gently at the floorboard near the wall, then looked up. David crouched and shone his phone's flashlight. There, faint scratches by the edge of the door. Shoe prints. Not deep, but long enough to suggest someone had stood there for a while. "Could have been a lookout, waiting for a signal from inside," David murmured. "Or someone arriving late. To clean up." Emily came closer. "If I hadn't found that note, if Lucy had stayed quiet, if it weren't for Buddy." Her voice cracked. What might have happened? David didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled up a chair across from her, his eyes softening. "We're not going to ask that question. Not tonight. What matters is that it didn't happen. And part of that is because of you." Emily looked up, surprised. "Most people fall apart when their child is in danger," he continued. "But you stayed calm, you observed. You trusted your instincts. You noticed the tiniest details. That may have saved more than just Lucy." Emily was quiet for a moment, then gave a faint smile. "I never thought of myself as brave." "No one's brave without fear," David said. "What makes you brave is that you were afraid, and you faced it anyway." Their warm silence was broken by the soft steps of Buddy returning. He sat between them, eyes searching theirs, then softened into a calm gaze. He tilted his head slightly, and in that small moment both David and Emily laughed. Not loudly, but enough to make the room feel lighter. "You said Buddy once failed a mission?" Emily asked hesitantly. David nodded, eyes drifting to the past. "A little girl. We were 1 hour too late. Since then, Buddy changed, more cautious, more quiet, but sharper. He doesn't forgive mistakes, and he never forgets." Emily gently stroked Buddy's back. "Then I'm grateful he came on time this time." David didn't respond, but inside, he felt something shift. Not just the widening of an investigation or the bond forming between him and Emily, but something rare and vital stirring again. Trust. And with that trust, in a battle only just beginning, they were no longer alone. Because Buddy's eyes, still alert beneath the late-night lamp, watched the rustling trees outside the window, whispering silently, "I'm here. I won't let it happen again." That night at Emily's house ended in a rare moment of peace. David said goodbye just before the clock struck 11 p.m. Buddy looked back toward Lucy one last time, as if making a silent promise, then leaped into the passenger seat of the patrol car. A drizzle fell, the breeze shifting through the dark silhouettes of trees lining the narrow road out of the neighborhood. Emily stood on the porch, watching the car disappear into the night. She closed the door, locked the bolt, turned off the porch light, and then walked into the bedroom where Lucy lay asleep. The little girl's face, bathed in the gentle glow of a star-shaped nightlight, showed a serenity she hadn't had in days. Emily smiled softly, pulled the blanket higher over her daughter's shoulders, and whispered, "You're safe now, Lucy. I promise. But sometimes the dark doesn't leave just because you close the door." 2:36 a.m. Buddy jolted upright. No bark, no sound, just the faintest shift outside, a change in the air, a signal a human would miss, but to a dog who had lived on the knife's edge between life and death, it was as clear as a siren. David, half asleep on the couch in his living room, noticed Buddy already standing at the door. The dog looked back at him, eyes blazing a silent alarm. One look was all it took. David sat up fast. "What is it, Buddy?" Buddy gave one short, sharp bark, then lunged towards the door. David asked no more questions. He grabbed his coat, flashlight, radio, and sidearm in seconds and followed. The car engine roared to life in 3 seconds flat. At Emily's house, all was still. No cars, no footsteps, just a shadow slipping past the back fence, crouching low along the wall. His eyes glinted in the dim moonlight, one hand holding a cloth-wrapped bundle, the other clutching a small vial of sweet-smelling liquid. He knew the way. Lucy's bedroom window didn't lock as tightly as the front door. He had been here before. Left the note to test their reaction. He knew Natalie was in custody, but the network was still active, and his orders were clear. Clean up, retrieve the girl, or silence her. The window creaked open. But at that precise moment, just wide enough for a hand, a black streak exploded through the night, shattering the silence with a feral roar. Buddy. No command, no hesitation. The glass shattered with a loud crack, followed by a muffled scream. The figure fell back into the yard, landing in the wet grass with a heavy thud. Buddy flew over the fence like a living missile, giving chase without a second's pause. Emily jolted awake from the sound. Lucy screamed. Lights flicked on, but outside, the chase had already begun. The intruder hunched low, sprinting toward the alley. Buddy clamped onto his pant leg, jerking him back. The man kicked, hard. Buddy staggered, a cut opening on his cheek. But he didn't back down. He sprinted forward again, cutting the man off. A siren howled. David arrived just in time, headlights locking onto the attacker's face. The man squinted, then threw something at Buddy, a glass vial of chloroform. It shattered, releasing a choking cloud. David yelled, "Buddy, fall back!" Buddy obeyed, just one step. The man scrambled over the rear fence, vanishing into the alley behind the abandoned houses. David gave chase, but the man was gone. Only the night remained, and Buddy's heavy, labored breathing. David dropped to one knee beside his dog. He touched the cut on Buddy's cheek. It wasn't deep, but it bled. "You did great, boy. Damn great." Buddy didn't whine, just panted hard, eyes still fixed on the alley's edge, as if to say, "He'll be back. They're not done yet." The next morning, Emily's yard was swarming with police and investigators. Lucy clung to Buddy's neck, not out of fear this time, but out of overwhelming gratitude. Emily stood beside David, eyes red but steady. "Will he come back?" she asked. David looked toward the fence, where Buddy's blood still stained the grass. "Maybe, but next time, we'll be waiting." Emily turned to Buddy, gently stroked his head, and whispered, "You're not just a dog anymore, Buddy. You're family." Buddy folded his ears, exhaled, and laid down beside Lucy, as if he knew. Here, he had just saved an entire little world, and he wouldn't leave, not while evil still lurked in the shadows. The next morning, Woodridge was no longer the peaceful town it had been. News of the attempted break-in at Emily Parker's house spread within hours. By the time the sun crested the mossy rooftops, the local police station was overwhelmed with concerned residents. Parents clutched their children's hands, faces filled with fear, confusion, and fury. It felt as if they'd awoken in the middle of a nightmare, still unfolding. "Can't the police protect my child?" a mother cried in the lobby. "We deserve the truth!" a father shouted. "If there's someone stalking kids in this town, you won't keep it hidden for long." No one noticed the man leaning casually against an old lamppost outside the elementary school. Max Walters, an investigative journalist with The Truth Ledger, known for exposing an infant trafficking ring in Iowa 3 years prior. His eyes were cold and sharp, locked onto the chaos with unsettling calm. Max was not the kind of man who believed in coincidences. When news broke of a teacher being arrested for suspicious behavior with children, and then was mysteriously pulled from the local site within an hour, he knew something bigger was being buried. And when he came across a Facebook post by a substitute teacher mentioning a retired police dog saving a girl in the night, Max packed his bag. He wasn't there to write a story. He was there to tear down the facade. David Carter wasn't surprised when Max showed up at his office the next morning, holding a steaming cup of coffee and a USB drive. "I don't buy the coincidence," Max said flatly. 3 states, 3 teachers vanish, then show up in a quiet little town like Woodridge, and now a break-in at the home of a child victim? You might keep silent, Carter, but I won't. David didn't respond immediately. Under the desk, Buddy lifted his head. No growl, no bark, just a stare. Piercing, assessing, as if asking, "Are you here to help or make things worse?" Max crouched slightly, extending a hand, non-threatening, respectful. But he didn't flinch. He looked and slowly lowered his ears. David understood that was enough. "You're not here for a headline, are you?" David asked, voice low. "I'm here to put pressure on the ones hiding behind fake credentials and legal silence," Max replied. And you, I think you already know, the law alone won't touch the core of this. David nodded. And if you dig too deep, they'll make you a target. Max smirked. They already found me. David frowned. Max placed the USB on the desk. An anonymous email hit my inbox this morning. No message, just an attachment. A photo of Buddy standing next to Lucy. David stiffened. They're watching us? Max nodded grimly. They know who's in the way, and maybe who the real soul of this fight is. Both men turned to look at Buddy. The dog lay still, but his gaze had changed. No longer just watchful. Now it was a warning. That afternoon, while Max began combing through archives in the school's records room, David drove Buddy around the neighborhood near Emily's home for a full sweep. There were no new signs, but Buddy stopped often, sniffed, scratched at the ground, and occasionally turned to David with a look that said, "They haven't gone far. They're watching, waiting for a slip." Meanwhile, Max stumbled upon something disturbing. A student named Emma Alvarez, once enrolled in a school where Sarah Miller had taught in Oregon. Emma's mother was a nurse who often worked night shifts. About a month ago, the school received a strange call, claiming her mother had been in an accident. Emma panicked and left school on her own. It mirrored Lucy's case, but after that day, Emma abruptly transferred. No one heard from her again. Max called David immediately. Once verified, the truth hit hard. Lucy wasn't the first target, and she wouldn't be the last. That night, as David sat at his desk, reading lamp-casting light on hastily pinned case photos, Buddy approached, something clenched in his mouth. A crumpled piece of paper Max had found in the older files. David unfolded it. Slanted handwriting read, "The eye that listens will never stay silent." He looked up at Buddy. "You saw it, didn't you?" Buddy returned the look. His deep eyes seemed to say, "People can be bought, can be fooled, but instinct doesn't lie. And in this darkness, we're not just watching, we're protecting something no court or gun can guard, a child's trust. And that's why, despite the long night ahead, Buddy would not leave his post at the door." In the days after the attempted break-in at Emily's house, fear didn't just hide in glances anymore, it seeped into every corner of the school. Recess grew quiet. The spark in children's eyes dimmed. Even the colorful drawings pinned on classroom walls now carried a quiet unease. Principal Zatkins knew this couldn't be ignored. Without the right psychological intervention, these children could grow up with invisible scars. So she brought in someone who understood trauma not just as theory, but as a lived, personal truth, Lena Reyes. Lena had once worked as a school psychologist in Chicago, helping children who had survived violence, loss, and abduction. But what brought her to Woodridge wasn't just her skills. It was the memory of her niece, Emily Reyes, a little girl who had been taken in a case where Officer David Carter and Buddy arrived too late to stop. Since then, Lena had shifted her mission, not just to heal, but to protect. From her first day at Woodridge, she didn't give a speech. She didn't ask for attention. She simply sat in the back row of classrooms, smiled, and asked simple questions like, "What did you enjoy most today?" Or, "If you had a safe place, what would it look like?" She listened not just to words, but to silences, to the downward gazes, the strange drawings. And soon she noticed a disturbing pattern. Too many children were too good. They never complained, never pushed back, always overly polite. In their drawings, adults were towering. Children were small, often without mouths. On her third day, Lena met with Lucy Parker. Lucy spun a blue crayon in her fingers. Lena didn't ask about the break-in. Instead, she handed Lucy a blank page and said, "If you had a friend who's always by your side, who would it be?" Lucy drew Buddy. Not once. 3 times. Buddy at the classroom door. Buddy under her desk. Buddy growled at a shadow. Lena noted every detail. "He hears the things I don't say," Lucy whispered. "Has anyone else ever heard them?" Lena asked gently. Lucy paused. Then she nodded, but didn't say a name. That night, Lena went to David Carter's home. She laid it all out. Lucy wasn't alone. 5 other children showed signs of grooming or manipulation. Each had been kept behind after class by an adult. Not always Natalie Graves. One mentioned a nice music teacher who gave candy. Another was a security guard who asked personal questions. But 3 mentioned a man with a nasal voice, curly hair, a wrinkled shirt, and a strangely soft tone. David stood up, walked to the investigation board, and pulled a staff photo. "Him?" he asked, pointing to George Hill, the special education aide with pale skin and avoiding eyes. Lena nodded. "He's assigned to students who struggle academically, often alone with them." Buddy, silent under the desk, stirred at the name. He rose, walked to the photo, sniffed it, then looked at David, and growled low and deep. David turned to Lena. "Can we get surveillance?" "Not without direct evidence," she said. "But if we create a situation where he's back around children." "And Buddy nearby," David finished. "This time we listen before something happens," Lena said. 2 days later, Lena organized a group emotional drawing session for special needs students. George Hill was invited to assist. Everything seemed normal. Kids painted, talked, played. Then George leaned down to pick up a paper near a boy named Ethan. Buddy, brought in to help calm the kids, stopped in his tracks in the hallway, head up, ears locked. Then, a growl, short, low, final. George froze. Ethan, holding a small keychain, recoiled. He said if I kept the secret, I'd get an A. Lena stood behind a curtain. She turned to David, waiting just outside. No more proof was needed. George Hill was the missing link. That night, Lena and David sat on the school's front steps. Buddy lay near the door, silent, his eyes sharp as ever. "We teach kids that silence is polite," Lena said softly. "But sometimes, silence is the chain that keeps them trapped by monsters who look like good people." David didn't speak. He looked at Buddy and knew that as long as that dog kept seeing what people couldn't, evil still had one enemy it couldn't fool. As David and Lena quietly prepared an emergency arrest warrant for George Hill, a woman stepped into the teacher's meeting room with a heavy expression. It was Nina Brooks, a third-grade teacher who had taught at Woodridge for nearly 12 years, affectionately known by her students as Miss Nina the Gentle. Nina had been silent all this time, not from fear or indifference, but because she had been trying to piece together a picture from fragments that didn't yet form something clear enough to voice. But now she knew. She could no longer stay silent. "I sensed something was wrong with Sarah Miller the very first week," Nina said slowly in a closed-door meeting with David, Ben Hunter, and Lena. Buddy lay under the table, his eyes turned up toward Nina as if listening. He didn't move, only breathed slowly and deeply, like he knew the words about to be spoken could open a new path in this maze. "She was too friendly," Nina continued. "Not the natural kind, but performative. I've seen that kind of smile before, in kids who've lived with abusers. They don't smile to be happy. They smile to survive." David nodded, jotting down every word. "She often asked students to stay after school. I questioned it once, and she always had a good reason, extra support and late pickup. But what was odd was that the kids never spoke about those sessions. When I asked, they just gave vague smiles or changed the subject. Some even seemed unusually tense." Ben tilted his head. "Did you keep track of who those students were?" "I didn't have the authority to record anything officially," Nina admitted. "But I wrote their names down in a private notebook. I was waiting for the right moment." She pulled out a worn, brown leather notebook. The first page showed a list of 8 names: Lucy Parker, Ethan Sloan, Emma Alvarez, and 3 others who had transferred mid-semester under vague circumstances. Lena let out a breath. "This list matches 80% of the profiles I've compiled from the therapy sessions." Nina lowered her gaze. "I feel guilty. I suspected. I sensed it. But I waited for proof. And maybe I let that chance pass me by." David clenched his pen. "No one blames you, Nina. This system doesn't make it easy for people like you to act without hard evidence, but now the pieces are coming together, and your voice is one of those pieces." Ben opened his laptop, entering the student names into a system linked to a network of IP addresses previously connected to the group's activity. Almost instantly, A result popped up. 2 of the transferred students had been identified on a VPN server once used to message Natalie Graves. "They're monitoring students through the school's digital systems," Ben muttered. "They know who's vulnerable, when parents are absent, who's an ideal target." Nina looked down, her eyes moist. "I don't want to be someone who doubts everyone, but I don't want to be someone who does nothing either." David turned to her, voice sincere. "And you're not. Thanks to you, we have another lead, and the kids have one more adult who's on their side." The next day, Nina was invited to observe a behavioral assessment session. Buddy was present as a special guest, but her real role was to quietly watch the interactions between other staff members and the children flagged in their investigation. During the session, Nina noticed how George Hill gently rested his hand on the shoulder of a girl as she stepped out of the classroom. The girl's posture stiffened, not in fear, but in familiarity. It wasn't a new sensation to her. Buddy, lying near the door, sprang to his feet. He didn't bark, just stared at George, then took a few steps toward the girl. She turned, met Buddy's gaze, and began to cry. Not from pain, not from fear, but because, in that moment, she saw eyes she could trust more than any adult's. George Hill froze. Nina stepped forward, gently took the girl's shoulder, and guided her away. David entered from the hallway, holding a recording just sent from Ben. A voice message. Nasal, short, unmistakable. "Clean up Woodridge Elementary by next week." The voice was George Hill's. That evening, as the sky turned gold, David, Ben, Lena, and Nina sat together under the school's front awning. Buddy lay beside them, his head resting against David's leg as usual. No barking, no growling. But in his eyes, there was something resolute. One part of the truth was out, but another still waited in the dark. Nina spoke softly, almost to herself. "We can't go back to the first day when the suspicion started, but we can make sure the last day of fear isn't far away." Late that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees west of Woodridge School, David Carter and Ben Hunter withdrew into their office, a space lit only by the glare of computer screens reflecting steel-like resolve on their faces. On the desk lay printed files, testimonies, class logs, and in the top left corner, a photo of Mr. George Hill, who had been arrested that morning. Buddy lay by the window, awake, his gaze fixed outside, ears alert to the slightest sound. Danger, to him, had never been confined to walls. It hung in the air, and he could feel it. Ben typed on the keyboard, his eyes locked onto the stream of decrypted data from Natalie Graves' burner phone. "You remember this name, don't you?" Ben turned the screen toward David. The text read, "Carolyn DeWitt, forged teaching license, previously registered in 3 counties, currently teaching at Willow Creek Elementary, Illinois." David squinted. "Carolyn DeWitt? She had contact with Natalie?" "Not just contact," Ben replied. "They shared a VPN for 4 months before Natalie moved to Woodridge. Indirect, encrypted messages. But here's what's worse. DeWitt was investigated in Oregon for inappropriate behavior with students. The case was handled internally." David leaned back, eyes darkening. Another monster behind a gentle mask. Ben looked up, his voice lowering. "There's a real chance DeWitt isn't just an accomplice. She could be the link between Natalie and the coordinator, the shadow behind the entire operation." Silence. David glanced at Buddy, who had now turned to look at him, eyes sharp like a blade unsheathed. "I know," David murmured, as if answering something unspoken. "We need to go." The next morning, David prepared to leave Woodridge. He stopped by Emily's house to let her know he'd be away for a few days. Lucy hugged Buddy tightly, whispering, "You better come back, okay? You haven't even finished your chew bones." Buddy gently touched his nose to Lucy's hand. A small gesture, but enough to make Emily turn away to hide her tears. "She slept through the night 2 days in a row," Emily whispered to David. "And I believe it's because of Buddy. He doesn't just guard the door, he guards her dreams." David placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll be back, when it's truly safe." The SUV tore down the highway toward Illinois. In the passenger seat, Buddy sat upright, eyes tracking every curve, every tree flashing past. To him, this wasn't a trip. It was a pursuit of an old scent, an unresolved memory. Willow Creek appeared under a gray afternoon. A quiet town, clean streets, a small church at the corner, and the elementary school nestled by pine-covered hills. But to David, it felt eerily like Woodridge. Too perfect, too calm. And it's often in that calm where the worst things are hidden. They didn't go to the school immediately. First, David and Ben met with a local mother, Marta Alvarez, whose daughter Emma once attended a school where Natalie had taught. Marta spoke in a whisper. Emma came home with a blank stare. She said a red-haired teacher gave her candy and told her not to tell anyone. I suspected something but had no proof, so I transferred her. David looked at Ben. No words were needed. Carolyn DeWitt. Red hair. Petite. Soft-spoken. But with a will like steel. The next day, David brought Buddy to Willow Creek Elementary under the pretext of a retired K-9 demo for school safety. The school welcomed them warmly. DeWitt stood at the end of the teacher line, light yellow blouse, round glasses, red hair tied neatly. A perfect smile. But Buddy didn't follow formalities. He stopped in the courtyard, the breeze rustling his ears. His eyes locked onto Carolyn DeWitt, unblinking, unmoving. A breath, then a low growl. David stepped close. Buddy had never growled at anyone, except Natalie Graves. And now, he was warning again. DeWitt smiled politely. Is he all right? David tilted his head. He never forgets someone who's hurt children. DeWitt flinched slightly but kept her face calm. I've never met him. No, but he's met people like you. As the children were led into class, Buddy stayed rooted, eyes locked on Dwight. In them, no warning was needed, just recognition. Deeper than scent. An instinct that said, this is the next link, this must be broken. And David knew. This trip to Illinois wasn't an ending. It was the opening of a door to whoever was truly behind all of this, and somehow Buddy had started to track them. That afternoon at Willow Creek Elementary, the air seemed as calm as any other day. But beneath that gentle exterior, the pressure was building with every passing minute. David Carter could feel it in every breath Buddy took. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off Carolyn DeWitt since they arrived on campus. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was intense focus, as if his spirit stretched taut, waiting for a moment that could pivot a child's fate on a second of inattention. As the dismissal bell rang, David and Ben were already in the hallway, pretending to inspect the security system with the school manager. Lena, via an urgent call from Nina Brooks in Woodridge, had just sent a critical update. Carolyn DeWitt had ties to a group of substitute teachers in 3 nearby counties, linked to a series of unexplained child disappearances. David clenched his teeth. If they didn't act tonight, it might be too late. Emma Alvarez, an 8-year-old girl with eyes quite like autumn lakes, had no idea she was walking the fragile edge between safety and danger. Her mother, Marta, had been told to stay home, keep contact, and not come to school. Because as Ben had deduced, if Carolyn was going to act, it would be today. When Emma walked home alone. When comfort became a trap. 1632, the halls were nearly empty. Instead of sticking with David, Buddy suddenly turned and veered left, toward the hallway behind the library, where the enrichment rooms were quiet. David was surprised but didn't stop him. Buddy had made his choice. Because he had heard what no human ear could, soft footsteps, the hush of a turning lock, and the uneven heartbeat of a frightened child. Inside the old, unused music room, dim lights, sealed windows, Carolyn DeWitt was crouched beside Emma. Her voice was sweet as syrup. It's just a game, darling. I'll take you somewhere with lots of other children, and there you won't have to worry anymore. Emma was silent, clutching her backpack straps. Tears had fallen, but she didn't dare sob. She remembered her mother's words. If something feels wrong, don't stay quiet. But she was too scared. Then, the door burst open, and a black blur shot in like wind. Buddy! Carolyn didn't have time to react. Buddy stood between her and Emma, growling low, a primal sound that needed no translation. His eyes glowed, not like a police dog, but like a guardian spirit ready to lay down his life for one small soul. Carolyn backed up, pulling a small bottle from her pocket. Chloroform. "Back off!" she snapped, holding the bottle toward Buddy. She never finished her sentence. David stormed in through the rear door, left unlocked on purpose, gun drawn, voice like steel. "Drop it, now!" Carolyn hesitated for half a second. A fatal mistake. Buddy lunged, not for the throat, not the face, but for the arm holding the bottle. It flew from her grip, skidding across the floor. In the same instant, David tackled her, pinning her with a precise arm lock. Carolyn screamed. The glass bottle stopped at Emma's feet. She looked at it, then at Buddy, and finally broke down. Not from fear, but from relief. She was safe. Carolyn was handcuffed and led away. No screaming, no resistance. Just one backward glance at Buddy. In her eyes, all pretended pride was gone, replaced by pure fear. She had realized something. It wasn't the police who brought her down, not the courts. It was a dog who had seen what she thought could stay hidden forever. When Emma was returned to her mother, the sunset spilled over the school's roof. Marta clutched her daughter, trembling, whispering, "You're safe now. You were so brave." Emma didn't speak. She turned, looked at Buddy, now standing at a distance with David, and ran to him. Buddy lowered his head. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering through tears tangled in his fur, "Thank you for hearing what no one else could." David stood quietly. He knew that tonight, one predator had fallen. But the shadows weren't gone, and Buddy's gaze never left the horizon, as if he knew there were still children out there who hadn't been found. And he would not stop, not while his heart beat, not while the truth remained buried. After the harrowing rescue at Willow Creek School, Carolyn DeWitt's name quickly entered federal criminal records, directly linking her to Natalie Graves and 3 other key nodes in the network. News of Buddy, the retired K-9 who had returned to action, began to spread through local media and social networks. Despite David's efforts to keep things under wraps, he knew that once Buddy's name was mentioned publicly, they had stepped out of the shadows, and that made them a target. At a temporary detention facility in Missouri, Natalie Graves, still calm despite her string of defeats, awaited her transfer. On the surface, she was a captured criminal. But beneath it all, the network she served still spanned across 3 states. A small note was discreetly passed to her by a bribed female guard. Just 3 lines. "The dog is ruining everything. He trusts his instincts more than the law. Act before it sniffs out the rest." Natalie clenched the note, her gaze turning cold. She wrote a simple reply and folded it. Tea, usual kind, 8:30 p.m. A few days later, back in Woodridge, David and Buddy returned to their small, pine-shrouded house. Emily, by now the quiet support for both, often dropped by in the evenings to care for Buddy while David worked with Ben. That afternoon, she came earlier than usual. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. Buddy lay with his head resting on the porch, eyes lazy as if relaxing. But Emily noticed. He didn't run up to her like always. He simply sniffed the air and turned away. She knelt near the water bowl by the window. A strange scent lingered. Faint, but present. Most people wouldn't notice. But Emily, a pharmacist with a toxicology background, formerly employed at a county-level clinic, didn't ignore the anomaly. She tilted the bowl and used a portable test strip she always carried. Seconds later, the strip changed color. Chlorpyrifos, a low-dose pesticide capable of paralyzing a dog's nervous system. Nearly undetectable without a blood test. Emily rushed back to Buddy. He still lay there, but his breathing had quickened. She lifted his head, her voice trembling. "Buddy, don't sleep, can you hear me?" He cracked open his eyes, tired but trying to reassure her. A weak wag of the tail, as if to say, "I'm still here. Don't worry." She called David immediately. He answered in 2 seconds. "Don't panic," she rasped. But there's poison in Buddy's water. I need you home. I'll keep him awake. David tore back like a storm. On the road, one thought looped in his mind. They found us again, and this time, they didn't aim at me. They want to silence the only instinct they can't outrun. Buddy. By the time he got home, Emily was gently feeding activated charcoal solution into Buddy's mouth, measuring the dose precisely for his size. Her hands shook, but her eyes were steady, sharp, like a surgeon in an emergency. "We're in time," she said, breathing heavily. "I stopped it before it reached the heart." David knelt beside Buddy, gripping his neck gently. "You hear me, Buddy?" A soft nudge of the nose against Emily's hand. A faint whimper like a whisper. Then silence. But it wasn't the silence of an ending. It was the stillness of survival. 3 days later, Buddy was recovering, though still weak. But what pained David more was the undeniable truth. The network feared Buddy enough to try and kill him, not with a gun, not with tranquilizers, but with a poison disguised in the most ordinary form. Kindness. "They sent someone to the house," David told Ben. "Someone who knows the layout. The routine. Calm enough not to raise suspicion." "This isn't tracking anymore," Ben replied. "It's psychological warfare." That night, Buddy lay on the porch like usual, his head on David's foot. Emily sat beside them, holding a cup of real tea. Safe, brewed by her own hands. David placed a hand on Buddy's head and whispered, "This time you didn't save anyone. Someone saved you." Buddy glanced at Emily, then closed his eyes, releasing a soft sigh. And in that moment, they all understood. This war wasn't just about stopping kidnappers. It was about protecting the fragile light of trust, in a world where even a drink of water could carry betrayal. But Buddy, exhausted as he was, still refused to leave his post. Because to him, loyalty doesn't take days off, and the gaze of a child is still a reason to survive. That night, Buddy fell asleep on the porch, but David did not. He sat in a chair, gripping a cold cup of tea, eyes fixed on the dog curled beneath the thin blanket Emily had placed. The memory of the chemical scent in the water bowl still hadn't faded, and he knew, every second he delayed, the monsters out there gained ground on innocent children. Ben called at 5 a.m. No greetings, no preamble. "I found Dana." David froze. "Alias Darla Winslow. Currently a speech therapist at Moran Hill Elementary, Kentucky. No legal credentials, but referred by a private education organization formerly linked to Natalie Graves." Wind rattled the window. Buddy opened his eyes. David spoke softly. "We're going." The town of Moran Hill was so small, it didn't even have a coffee shop open at dawn. Its main road was dead silent, like it had never been woken. Every house seemed to have slept too long, letting darkness creep into their windows like forgotten memories. David didn't wear a uniform. He arrived like a father searching for a stolen child. And Buddy didn't need to be leashed at his side. He walked slowly, each step heavy as if already sensing the stench of crime. Moran Hill Elementary looked like a repainted, abandoned chapel. Pale yellow brick walls, a weathered wooden door, a rusted nameplate. But no coat of paint could hide what David felt in his gut. Something was locked inside here. Not a person. The truth. When David knocked on the administration office, a woman's voice called from inside. "Come in, it's not locked." The door creaked open. There, among dusty textbooks and plastic plants, stood Darla Winslow, known to the FBI as Miss Dana. Neat silver hair, beige cardigan, a crooked name badge. And her eyes, the kind that didn't silence children with fear, but with control. "Hello?" she said, as if welcoming a client for a scheduled therapy session. "Coffee?" David didn't sit, didn't shake her hand. "We know who you are." Darla tilted her head. "I know who you are too, Jack Carter, and this is Buddy." Her eyes flicked to the dog standing beside David, motionless, silent, watching. "He's still alive, I see," she smiled. "Honestly, I expected more from my people." David stepped forward. "This doesn't end with Natalie or Carolyn. You're the next link. You think you'll get away? Standing here in front of the one thing that never forgets the scent of guilt? Buddy moved ahead, placing himself squarely in front of David like a living shield. His stance firm, ears high, eyes sharp and unblinking, as if his whole being had become a wordless warning. Darla's gaze faltered, just for a second. Then she turned to poor T. "You think you'll drag me out? Tie me up in the schoolyard? Here?" She chuckled, not turning around. "I teach their kids their first words. I help mute children speak. Here, I'm a healer." "You're the reason some never speak again," David growled. Through fear, through threats, through silence. Darla set the cup down and turned. This time her gaze shed all pretense. "You think you're a hero? The police might arrest me, but the system behind me? You won't touch it, but this dog he might." She knelt, staring at Buddy. "And that's why he must be the first to go." In that instant, Buddy growled, not from rage, but as a warning from a creature that had faced darkness and refused to bow. David pulled out an old photo. Dana and a graying man in sunglasses, standing near a little girl in Tennessee. "We have pictures, statements, witnesses." Darla glanced at the photo. She didn't deny it, didn't explain. She only asked, voice cold and precise, "How many will speak up if that dog disappears?" No one believes tears, but they believe in barking. That's your weakness. David tucked the photo into his pocket and stepped closer, face to face. "And that's why I'll protect him, until my last breath." Outside, gray clouds gathered. Buddy stood still, like stone. But his eyes, twin blades, remained locked on Darla Winslow. And in them David saw something wordless. "Even if tomorrow is pure night, I will stand here. Not for orders, for the children." And David knew. The fight had entered its most dangerous chapter. No longer pursuit. Now it was a confrontation between unwavering instinct and unrepentant evil. Morning in Marin Hill passed quietly, like any other day, but inside David Carter, an unnamed sense of dread smoldered, like smoke rising from ashes not yet cold. After the heavy confrontation with Darla Winslow, whom he now knew without a doubt was Dana, the figure behind a dark network casting long shadows over the childhoods of so many, he couldn't return to Woodridge while one soul remained unrescued. Her name was Maya Gibson, 8 years old, born with asthma. She lived with her grandmother in an old wooden house just a few blocks from the school. David had seen Maya from a distance the day before, when Darla led her out of therapy. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She didn't show anything except a chilling emptiness in her eyes, the kind of look David had seen on children too deeply manipulated to even trust their fear. At that moment, he knew. Maya was next. Maybe this week, maybe today. Buddy knew it too. He didn't follow the usual hallway route. Instead, he silently made his way down the steps toward the special education wing, the most soundproofed, least frequented area of the school. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, he just moved, quietly, with a burdened determination in every step, as if the very air whispered something only a dog could hear. Meanwhile, David entered the main office, posing as a visiting educator evaluating the special ed program. Part of him burned to rush in immediately, but he had learned over the years that haste often let evil slip away in an instant, only to vanish into nameless shadows. Today, he placed his trust in the one thing that had never failed him, Buddy's instinct. Inside the speech therapy room at the end of the hall, Darla, Dana Winslow, sat across from Maya. The girl sat like a battered leaf, her eyes avoiding contact, her hands clenching her backpack straps until her knuckles turned white. Dana, in her syrupy voice, whispered phrases like poisoned honey. "You know keeping secrets keeps people safe, don't you? Your grandma would be so sad if you did something wrong." To an adult, the words were empty, but to a child, they were shackles. That's when the door creaked open, not by a human hand, but by a nose that had pushed through gun smoke, dried blood, and tears. Buddy entered like a silent shadow, but one that could not be ignored. He didn't greet me. He didn't warn. He simply stood there, a monument to instinct and loyalty, eyes glowing with a light that made anyone who'd ever harmed a child feel their bones chill. Dana turned. In that fleeting moment, her composure cracked. Her lips tightened. One hand clenched Maya's wrist, like a tether keeping her rooted to the false world she had built. Buddy stepped forward. Not hurried, not slow. His nose swept the air. He paused, by a drawer left slightly ajar. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Not loud, but thick, deep, and final. Like a verdict not delivered by man, but by justice long forgotten. David appeared just then. He didn't need to speak. Buddy had said it all. "Dana Winslow," David said, voice steady as steel. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to abduct minors, identity fraud, and psychological manipulation of children." Dana turned. No more smiles, no excuses. She stepped back, but Buddy stood in her path, eyes locked. A single bark broke the air, not a threat, a period. Maya ran into David's arms, tears soaking his shirt. But then she let go and turned to hug Buddy. That hug said everything. It held fear released, trust restored, and the safety only a creature like Buddy could give, not through words, but through presence. And as Dana was led away in cuffs, the last eyes she saw were not David's, but Buddy's. Not hateful, not triumphant, just enduring. As if to say, "I'll be here. When the next child needs me, I will be there. Faster, deeper." No one escapes this instinct. Because for Buddy, this was only the beginning. Thick gray clouds hung over Kentucky as the transport vehicle carrying Dana Winslow rolled toward the temporary federal facility near the state border. The highway stretched on in silence. Inside the vehicle, no one spoke. Dana sat in the back, hands cuffed. The false confidence she'd worn as Miss Darla was gone. In its place, a deep, guarded silence, the kind kept by those who know the end is near but still clutch a few final cards. David sat in front, hand resting lightly on Buddy's head. The dog sat in the far back seat, breathing calmly, his eyes never leaving the divider glass between them and Dana. He wasn't curious. It was more like he was listening, not with ears, but through emotional frequencies that humans are too busy to feel. The interrogation room was small, a cold metal table, a sickly yellow bulb overhead, 2 chairs facing each other. Dana entered, head held high. But the moment she saw Buddy, sitting in the corner beside David, a faint crack crossed her expression. She said nothing, but it was clear. The dog's presence fractured her defenses before a word was spoken. David took his time. He opened the case file, flipping each page slowly, letting her feel the weight of the evidence piling like stones. Then he looked up. "Emma Alvarez, Maya Gibson, Lucy Parker, 3 children in 3 states, all had encounters with women like you. Natalie Graves, Carolyn Dweet, and you. What do you have to say?" Dana curled her lip. "I don't deny it, but I'm not the only one. You know that." "We know," David said, voice low. "We're tracking every one of them." "No, you're not." Dana leaned back, her tone now soft, sharp as a blade. "You'll catch a few names, but not the root. We aren't a group of criminals. We're a system." She looked him in the eye. "And you? Even with your whole police force, you won't stop a tide." David didn't flinch. He played an audio recording, part of Carolyn Dweet's confession. She had named Dana as a high-level coordinator, contacted through encrypted phones, assigned targets by semester, and provided hideouts and extraction plans after completing psychological conditioning. Dana listened, unmoved. When it ended, she said quietly, "The ones you've caught? Replaceable? Natalie was fragile, breakable. But me? I'm the foundation." David gripped the file. "You're claiming to be the heart of the operation?" Dana tilted her head. "Not claiming. Warning." Buddy stirred slightly. He didn't growl, didn't bark, just exhaled. A long breath, as if catching the scent of something buried beneath words. David fixed his eyes on her. Why Maya? Why the voiceless? A flicker, pity or disdain, passed across Dana's face. She answered slowly, because they're easy to teach, easy to silence, and no one listens to them. Not unless a dog barks. The last sentence hit David like a punch to the chest. He didn't respond right away, but something lit in his gaze. Something that would not go out. He turned to Buddy. The dog sat still, eyes never blinking, locked on Dana as if to say, "Hide all you want. I will find you. The children don't need to scream anymore. I am their voice." By the end of the session, Dana gave a list. 5 names, 5 locations. No maps, no specifics, just codes. But to Ben Hunter, watching from the monitoring room, those codes matched a pattern from an anonymous network they'd been tracking for nearly a year, unable to crack. As Dana was led out, she turned. Not with defiance, but with one final warning. "You may protect that dog today, but when the next wave rises, will you still be sharp enough to protect yourself?" David didn't answer. He stood, walked to Buddy, and rested his hand gently on the dog's head. "We don't just protect each other," he said. "We protect what you never understood. Trust." Outside, the hallway dimmed in the waning light. Buddy walked beside David. No leash, no command. Just 2 silhouettes, 1 man, 1 dog, emerging from the dark pages of one chapter, ready to open the next, where the children would speak again, and truth, however late, would finally be heard. After all the tense interrogations, chilling testimonies, and names brought to light under the glare of investigation, David Carter understood that the fight against the criminal network was far from over. But he also knew another war, quieter yet equally fierce, waited elsewhere, inside the hearts of children who had been dragged to the brink of fear. And on that battlefield, guns and laws had no place. Here, gentleness, listening, and patience were the strongest weapons. So, after Dana's arrest and the unraveling of her network, David called the first person who came to mind, Lena Reyes, a woman who had poured her heart into helping children find their voices again, not just through therapy, but through silences that adults often failed to hear. The temporary counseling center was set up in a small room inside the Woodridge School library. No desks, no blackboards, just soft rugs, shelves of paints and picture books, and a window overlooking a garden shedding its autumn leaves. Lucy and Emma, 2 girls who had endured moments too heavy for most adults to name, sat apart, each in their own space, yet their eyes occasionally met, as if sharing something no one else could understand. They didn't yet have words for their feelings. But they no longer looked away when Lena entered, her smile gentle, her voice as soft as the early autumn wind. "We don't need to talk today," Lena said as she sat on the rug, laying out blank sheets of paper. "Just draw what your heart is holding." Lucy looked at Buddy, lying quietly in the corner, not moving, but eyes open, guarding every breath. After a moment's hesitation, then she picked up a green crayon and drew a house, its door wide open, and a dog standing guard in front of it. Emma chose purple. She drew a tree with a bird's nest high in the branches, and a dog resting at the base, looking up. No one asked why. Lena simply nodded as if each line held its complete answer. By the 3rd week, Lucy began speaking more, not recounting but remembering, gently and on her own terms. She talked about sunny mornings through the window curtains, about how her mother always burnt one side of the toast, about dreams where Buddy sat outside her house, guarding her sleep. No one told her to be strong, but she was becoming a new version of herself, a child who knew she had survived and deserved to feel safe. Emma remained quieter, but one afternoon, when Lena stepped out briefly for tea, Buddy unexpectedly rose and walked over to her. He lay down, not pressing, not nudging like usual. Emma looked at him, then gently placed her tiny hand on his back. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but because it had been so long since she dared to trust that something might stay, even if she said nothing. And then she whispered, just for Buddy to hear. "I'm not scared anymore. You're here." Buddy exhaled softly, closing his eyes. A quiet confirmation. Lena watched from the doorway. She didn't enter. She knew real healing often didn't come from couches or clinical language, but from raw, instinctive connections, like that between a silent child and a dog who couldn't speak but understood everything. When the session ended, Lucy walked out hand in hand with Lena. The sunset spilled across the long hallway. Lucy looked up and whispered, "Miss Lena, can I tell my story someday?" Lena paused, kneeling. "Who do you want to tell it to?" Lucy looked toward Buddy, now walking leisurely beside David across the field. "To other kids. The ones who aren't ready yet." Her voice was steady. Her gaze, once frozen by fear, now carried a flicker of light, like a candle newly lit. Not out of pressure, but out of belief. David watched from afar. 2 children, a quiet woman, and a dog lying by their feet, head resting gently on the rug, eyes half closed, as if finally able to rest after long nights guarding in silence. But he knew, beneath that fur beat the heart of a warrior still awake. And in Lucy's heart, a new seed had just taken root in soil once trampled. Because sometimes a dog doesn't just save a child's life. It teaches them that survival is not the end. It's the beginning of courage. Autumn wind whispered across the Woodridge schoolyard as rows of chairs lined the lawn before a small stage built from reclaimed wood. Red ribbons wrapped around tree trunks. Blue and white balloons danced softly under the vast sky. The air that day felt purer than usual, as if even the weather understood that this wasn't just another school event. It was a ceremony to honor Buddy, the retired police dog who had never truly stopped fighting. It wasn't just a tribute. It was gratitude. It was recognition. It was a response to the growl that had saved little souls almost swallowed by darkness. In the front row, Lucy Parker and Emma Alvarez sat side by side in white dresses, each holding a small bouquet of wild daisies they'd picked from home gardens. Maya's grandmother was there too, clutching her granddaughter's hand like she feared letting go might pull the girl back into the past. Lena Reyes sat quietly among the other parents, eyes shining, soft as the early winter wind. Behind the stage, David Carter gently ran his hand down Buddy's back. Buddy wore his old vest, not to go into battle but to remind everyone that he had been a soldier, and still was. But today, there were no alarms, no urgency. Today, he only needed to step forward and receive the love he had always given, quietly. When the MC invited David to the stage, applause filled the schoolyard. Not loud, not wild, but full of a deep, rippling gratitude, rising from the memories each person held of Buddy sitting silently outside a classroom, walking calmly beside a frightened child, or lying quietly by a hospital bed. David stood silent at the mic for a moment, eyes sweeping across familiar faces and strangers alike, people who had come simply to say thank you. His voice was deep and clear, not forceful, but steady, like Buddy's footsteps. "I don't know where to start, because in 7 years beside Buddy, I never imagined we'd stand here like this. Not in danger, but in light. Not to arrest someone, but to acknowledge something simple. Loyalty, if held long enough, becomes a medal, and today, Buddy is proof of that." He paused. Flags fluttered gently behind him. Buddy sat calmly at his side, eyes squinting in the sun as if smiling without showing his teeth. This dog has no degrees. He can't write reports, but he knows when a child is trembling in fear. He knows when someone's eyes hold a lie that words won't admit. In moments when I, and anyone, still doubted, Buddy acted. No orders, no hesitation. He just stepped forward and growled. For those who hadn't found their voices yet, applause rose again, this time accompanied by a few quiet sobs. Lena wiped her eyes. Lucy gripped Emma's hand tighter. At that moment, Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was the embodiment of an instinct that never betrayed what was right. David knelt and removed a small medal pinned to Buddy's collar. He held it high, then lowered it gently onto Buddy's head. like a crown returned to a silent king. There's no badge worthy of Buddy, but we hope today's gratitude, from the children saved, from the community awakened, is the truest reward. Maybe this world would have been darker if not for animals like Buddy reminding us, courage needs no language, it only needs to be lived. As David stepped back, Lucy approached and laid a white daisy wreath on Buddy's paw. She said nothing but held up a hand-painted sign. "Thank you, Buddy. You are my safe place." Buddy glanced at her, then rested his head on David's leg. And everyone knew. This ceremony didn't mark an ending. It opened something new, a belief that trust can be rebuilt if we learn to listen, even when the voice comes from a dog who only growls when it matters most. That winter, whenever a bark echoed from the schoolyard, the children didn't flinch. They smiled, because they knew Buddy was near. After Buddy's tribute ceremony, an afternoon that seemed to reach the deepest layers of the community's collective heart, life in Woodridge began to settle. Children returned to school. Parents became more alert and more present. And although emotional scars didn't vanish overnight, at least the sky no longer felt as heavy and gray as before. But for David Carter and Ben Hunter, that peace was only a pause, because darkness doesn't stop just because light has been lit in one place. In a small room by the back garden, once used to store evidence, Ben spread out a hand-drawn map. It wasn't a standard issue. It was a patchwork of secret data, built from fragments of codes Dana had uttered, cross-referenced with intel recovered from seized devices during previous arrests. 3 final points glowed: Nevada, Oregon, and New Mexico. Not just locations, they were still bleeding wounds, the last whispers of a dying network trying desperately to cling to crumbling walls. David looked at Ben. No words were needed. They both knew that the ending doesn't come when one person is cuffed, but when no child is left voiceless. They split the mission. David chose New Mexico, Santa Fe specifically, where a former child support center had once quietly dismissed a staff member for unprofessional conduct, with the personnel file mysteriously deleted by a now-retired director. Ben took Oregon, targeting Eugene, where an art teacher named Maxwell Creel had hosted unsupervised residential programs under the guise of therapeutic art retreats without local agency approval. Nevada, Natalie Graves' old stomping ground, was assigned to a joint task force with the FBI, but David kept Buddy by his side, not just out of habit, but because deep down he knew that some shadows can't be seen by human eyes. They shudder only in front of a creature that cannot lie. New Mexico greeted David with dry winds and a dusty sky. The private facility he visited was called El Cielo, the sky, a peaceful name. But inside, under artificial light and unnatural silence, it felt like many places David had seen before, where quiet wasn't peace, but calculated concealment. As always, Buddy entered free of the leash, free of hesitation. His eyes swept the building, and within minutes he stopped, outside the medical room. No one would have suspected it. But inside, the team uncovered a secondary basement with collapsible beds, behavioral therapy manuals, and internal movement logs for children, as if they were products in training. The man in charge, posing as a licensed psychologist, was arrested on the spot. He didn't resist, but his eyes locked on Buddy, knowing at that moment that every exit had been closed by a growl at just the right time. In Oregon, Ben and his team found Maxwell Creel in a studio filled with children's paintings, but no children. He had planned to flee, but decrypted account data revealed 3 minors had just been relocated to a care facility on the outskirts. Within 18 hours, a raid was executed. All 3 were rescued, shaken, but safe. In Nevada, armed with Dana's intel and Natalie's earlier statements, the FBI raided a facility beneath a fake life skills academy in Las Vegas. The ringleader, a so-called educational consultant, was trafficking children to unverified private adoptive families, most operating beyond legal oversight. 3 raids, 3 strongholds of darkness, all were dismantled at once. And in each report, each site log, not just evidence and charges, but thanks to a dog, not for sniffing blood, but for preserving something many had lost, the ability to sense right and wrong, purely by instinct. When David and Buddy returned to Woodridge at winter's end, the town had changed. Trees were bare, fog drifted under the hills, but inside the people, there was the calm of a journey closed. Emily welcomed them with a wordless hug. Lucy ran up and looped a red scarf around Buddy's neck, hand-stitched with the words, "You finished what no one else could." David bowed his head and wrapped his arms around Buddy. In the chill of that breath, he knew the curtain had finally fallen. No more figures hiding behind glass, no more children were taken in silence. And Buddy, the dog who growled on behalf of the voiceless, had completed his mission. That winter wasn't as bitter as the ones before. Or maybe it was because, after all the hunts and the times he stared into the dark, Jack Carter had finally learned how to recognize warmth, not from sunlight or fire, but from eyes that no longer watched him with caution, from children who no longer startled in their sleep, and from a woman whose hands were always half open, ready to hold something close, though once so fragile. Emily Parker was no longer the lonely mother who clutched her phone, fearing the worst kind of call. And Jack was no longer the man who lived only in crime scene reports and haunted memories. They still carried scars, but instead of hiding them, they looked at them together. And they saw that wounds didn't make people weak. They made them real. Jack began spending more time in Woodridge, no longer rushing off after every case. In the afternoons, he and Emily would pick up Lucy from school, walking with her down the leaf-strewn path to the edge of the forest, where the sunset spilled like threads of golden silk. And always, always, Buddy was by their side, red scarf at his neck, back straight, eyes scanning everything, yet walking calmly as if life no longer needed to be rushed. One day, after Lucy had fallen asleep on the sofa, tired from art class, Emily poured 2 cups of hot tea and sat beside Jack on the porch steps. "Will you leave town?" she asked quietly, eyes fixed on the living room door where soft yellow light glowed through. Jack didn't answer right away. He glanced at Buddy, who lay stretched out at Lucy's feet, head resting lightly on the edge of a blanket, breathing slow like a lullaby. "I think," Jack said slowly, "people only leave when they feel there's nothing left to stay for." Emily turned to him, and her eyes held a smile as soft as spring air. "And now?" "Now," he nodded. "I think I've found things I can't walk away from." From that day on, life took on a new shape. Jack no longer slept at the police station more than 3 nights a week. The rest of the time, he was with Emily and Lucy. Not as a guest, but as part of something growing out of the ruins of the past. Together with Buddy, they began forming small rituals. Morning walks to the bakery, weekend visits to the market, quiet evenings reading by the fireplace, where Buddy always lay stretched out, a silent but steadfast guardian. Jack taught Lucy how to tie her shoes fast, something he had once taught his younger brother long ago. Emily told Jack about her early years as a single mother, not as complaints, but as shared beats of a rhythm only silence could tune into. And sometimes, amid all of it, came quiet moments where the 3 of them would sit beneath the porch roof, watching Buddy chase butterflies in the garden, never realizing he was carrying the fragile light of a once broken family. One late afternoon, Lucy drew a picture for Buddy, a dog standing among 3 people, a man in rolled-up sleeves, a woman with her hair tied neatly, and a little girl holding an ice cream cone. At the top, in messy handwriting, "This is our family." Emily read it and smiled. Jack held the drawing in silence for a long time. "What do you think Buddy is in our family?" he asked. Lucy tilted her head. "He's the heart, because he hears everything we don't say." Jack leaned down and hugged her. Not too tight, but enough to make her feel safe. And when he looked at Buddy, the dog was lying on his side, ears twitching, eyes glowing in the sunlight, as if he'd just heard something warm. Quiet, but deeply true. After that, no one needed to say anything out loud. There was no wedding, no formal ceremony. But Jack started repairing the porch roof. Emily added a second nightstand beside the bed. And Lucy, whenever she drew a house, always put 4 figures inside. The dog was always in the center. Because sometimes a dog isn't just a companion. He's the thread that ties together people once broken. He's the witness to a new kind of family. Quiet, complete, and whole. After those rare, peaceful days under a sunlit porch, with Lucy's pure laughter and Emily's understanding eyes, Jack Carter began to notice something changing in the way Buddy moved. It wasn't exhaustion, but a deeper, calmer gaze, like he knew most battles had already been fought, and what remained wasn't about guarding anymore, but passing on what he'd learned. Buddy, who once growled in the middle of a classroom when no one else could sense what was wrong, who had followed the trail of evil when every clue was in pieces, had become a symbol of unyielding instinct. One mid-spring day, a representative from the state's K-9 training division called Jack. "We'd like to invite Buddy to be an honorary instructor for our new generation of K-9 recruits. He won't be doing pursuit work anymore. We just need him to be there, to lead, to pass on what no human can teach." Jack paused for a few breaths. Then he looked at Buddy, lying under the backyard tree where Lucy had just placed a small pillow. Sunlight fell through the leaves, stitching gentle shadows across his back like soft threads of time. Jack nodded. He didn't ask Buddy, but Buddy, as if he heard, gave a quiet wag of his tail. The K-9 training camp was on the edge of the northern mountains, where red dirt trails sliced through pine forests, and young pups ran wild with raw, unfocused energy, loud, eager, but lacking direction. Then, amid all that noise, when Buddy arrived, without barking, without commands, the air seemed to be still. He didn't teach with orders. He didn't chase through obstacles. He simply existed. He sat quietly, watching the younger dogs learn to sniff, to track, to stay calm through loud sounds. Whenever a pup got overwhelmed or ran the wrong way, Buddy would simply walk over, touch its nose gently, and then look forward, toward where it needed to go. Not a word was spoken, and yet somehow those young eyes always absorbed the most vital lesson. Calm is power. A young trainer standing next to Jack whispered, "I've never seen a dog other dogs follow just by watching his eyes." Jack smiled, pride gleaming openly in his gaze. "He doesn't need to teach," he said. "He just reminds them. If your heart is steady, no amount of noise in the world can lead you astray." Buddy didn't move the way he used to. His leaps were slower now, his gait less fluid than during his time in the field. But his gaze, still sharp, still steady, still holding what no amount of drills could reach. The instinct born from facing what no one else dared to. At the final ceremony of the training month, Jack was invited to speak at the first K-9 graduation, where Buddy was the honorary guide. On the wide lawn beneath the waving state flag, the young dogs lined up beside their new handlers, excited, untested by real danger, but ready. Jack stepped up. Buddy sat by his side, still wearing the old red scarf Lucy had embroidered. "Buddy was my partner," Jack began, voice deep, carried by the mic. He was also the only one whose judgment I never doubted. But more than that, he was the first to remind me that life isn't only protected by weapons, but by the presence of someone brave enough to stay when everyone else turns away. He paused. The wind stirred. "And today, I don't just see new working dogs. I see future buddies. Creatures who carry not just fur and commands, but hearts tuned to the things humans haven't yet said out loud." As Jack stepped down, Buddy sat silently like a statue. But within him, thousands of memories were being passed on, without a single word. And when the young dogs crowded around Buddy, tails wagging wildly, eyes bright, the crowd didn't just see a teacher. They saw the core of loyalty, passed across generations. Because Buddy didn't just leave paw prints on the training field, he left behind the belief that light could be passed on. Not through promises, but through the quiet presence of those who never walk away from what's right. When the last journeys closed, when doors that once hid fear opened wide to the light, and barks that once rang like alarms faded into memory, life, like a healing wound, turned a quiet page. Not because everything was perfect, but because what needed saving had been saved, and the souls who needed holding had been held. Buddy, warrior without a weapon, teacher without a voice, no longer wore a vest or sat in command rooms. He spent most of his days beneath Jack's porch, where Lucy's laughter echoed each afternoon, where Emily's baked goods filled the air with warmth, and where Jack's silhouette sometimes paused from writing, glancing over at Buddy, just to make sure he was still there. And Buddy, of course, always was. One golden afternoon, like thick honey, Woodridge School invited Jack back to speak at a community education event. They didn't expect a grand speech. They just wanted to hear someone who had seen both light and darkness, who still carried faith. Say something real. Jack walked onto the small stage. Buddy followed, as always. In front of them were students, parents, rookie officers, teachers, and people who once thought instinct was just an idea, until they saw a regular dog stand between good and evil. Jack took a deep breath and spoke, not loud, but rich with feeling. I used to think courage meant not being afraid, but Buddy taught me courage is knowing fear and stepping forward anyway. I used to think vigilance was a job for people in uniform, but Buddy reminded me, vigilance is instinct, and instinct is something we all have, though we often silence it. Not because we don't hear it, but because we don't trust ourselves. He leaned down and gently patted Buddy's head. Ears perked, still listening as if it were day one. And finally, I used to think love needed flowers or words. But through his quiet presence, Buddy taught me that sometimes simply not leaving is all it takes for someone to feel they're no longer alone. The ceremony ended not with cheers, but with an unhurried round of applause, from people who knew they had just heard something true, from someone real, and from a dog who didn't need to say a thing. That evening, on the lawn behind the little house where Jack, Emily, and Lucy lived, there were no more traces of danger, only the wind through branches and laughter spreading like ripples. Lucy tossed a ball, and Buddy ran, not as fast as before, but with steps whole. Emily leaned against Jack, fingers entwined, watching Buddy play, as if all three of them knew this moment, though brief, was enough to heal a lifetime of pain. Lucy ran to Buddy, hugging him tight, face buried in the thick fur now laced with silver. "He's the best thing I've ever had," she whispered. Jack nodded. "Because he stayed, even when everyone else had gone." Buddy lay down, head resting on Lucy's legs, eyes gently closed, breath calm, as if the beat of a heart once hardened by fire was finally resting in a home no longer afraid. And there, in an ordinary, quiet evening, was a final ending. No fireworks, no spotlight, just a dog lying beside the people he loved, a slow wag of the tail, a look exchanged, and no more words needed. Because some bonds need no promises, no farewells. They only need a dog and people who still listen to their hearts. If you've followed this far, your heart, like ours, has likely been moved by Buddy's story, a dog not just brave, but who listened to the silent fears of children, stood firm when humans hesitated, and chose to stay when others had gone. So what about you? In your life, who or what made you feel protected and understood, even without words? Share your story in the comments. It might be just what someone else needs to hear right now. If you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep telling stories that are simple, but strong enough to change a life. See you in the next one, where courage doesn't need a roar, just a heart that doesn't give up.